In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Please sit down. Be seated. Today we celebrate the martyrdom of St. Luke. And St. Luke is a famous apostle, and he's done something good for us. The Holy Spirit inspired him, and he wrote 2 books in the Bible. 2 books, St. Luke wrote them. Anybody knows which books that St. Luke wrote? Yes? Thank you. The Gospel of St. Luke, that carries his name, and the book of Acts. 2 books. Actually, in the New Testament, he wrote more than anyone else. You know that St. Paul wrote how many letters? How many letters St. Paul wrote? Yes? 14 letters. So how are you going to ask me, how come that St. Luke wrote 2, and they are more than 14 letters than St. Paul wrote? Anybody has an idea why? Because the Gospel of St. Luke has how many chapters? How many chapters in the Gospel of St. Luke? Yes? There's 2 books. How many chapters in the first one? The Gospel of St. Luke has many chapters. How many chapters, Stephen? 24. 24 chapters. And the book of Acts, how many chapters? How many chapters in the book of Acts? 28. So you add the 2 together, will come to be 28 and 24, 52. 52 chapters he wrote. Most of the letters of St. Paul are made of 3 or 4 chapters. They're not many. But he, more than anybody wrote, they say he made the big bulk of the New Testament. St. Luke is the one who wrote most of the material that we have. What else we know about St. Luke? St. Luke was a very brilliant man, very gifted. How do we know that? First of all, his writing is the most sophisticated, advanced, eloquent. He wrote in a Greek language that is actually people who only knew and were educated, highly educated, would write it. Everybody who reads the Gospel in its original language, which is Greek, would say that St. Luke wrote it beautifully. It was almost like poetic. Wrote the most beautiful language, even more than St. Paul. Yes? It took him his life. All his life was writing the Gospel and the book of Acts. But then what else we know about him? We also know about him that he was very well educated. He was a doctor. He was a doctor. He used to treat people and heal people. St. Paul, in one of his letters to Timothy, he said, "Take Luke and bring him with you because he's useful to me." And he said greet Luke, Luke the physician greet you. He's with him. He was a physician. He was a doctor. What else we know about him from tradition now? Although he was clever and he was well learned and he knew how to read and write eloquently, I'm very happy when I see the deacons and the deaconesses and the girls and the boys in our church read and they read fluently. They don't make mistakes in reading. Makes me happy. But also we know that St. Luke was very eloquent and very well read. What else we know about him? He also had a very nice hobby that people knew it everywhere you go. When we visit Armenia, we heard about it. I heard about it, and in Egypt we know it. In every place you go where there's Christians, you know about that. St. Luke left something else other than the Gospel and the book of Acts. What did he do? He painted an icon of Saint Mary with baby Jesus. So that the tradition says that he was also an artist. He knew how to paint. Most probably because he studied bodies, anatomy, and the part of what you do when you used to be a physician in the old times, you have to draw the body, the muscles and everything. So they learn how to draw. So he drew a picture. He made a painting of St. Mary and baby Jesus. We know that he had to do this how would you draw a picture of someone? We didn't have a camera at that time. What would you need to do? Yes? You would let them sit and start Painting. So most probably he did this looking at St. Mary. So he was very close to St. Mary. After Jesus ascended to heaven, he sat with St. Mary a long time, and we know that he did that. St. Luke sat with St. Mary for a long time. How do I know that? In the beginning of his gospel, he wrote, I'm going to write you this gospel, and he's sending it to someone. His name is Theophilus. He said, Theophilus, I'm writing this from eyewitnesses. What do you mean, eyewitnesses? Yes? So it happened, right? Yes, Johnny. Someone who saw it happen. Yeah. So what did he write actually? He said an angel came to Zechariah the priest. Who would know that? Actually, when St. Luke wrote his gospel, Zechariah was dead. Elizabeth was dead. John the Baptist was dead. So how would he get an eyewitness to tell him about what happened to Zechariah in the temple? When the angel came to tell him, you're going to have a boy. Who? St. Mary, because she was very close family relation to Zechariah. When she heard that Elizabeth was pregnant, what did St. Mary do? She ran. She went quickly from Nazareth in Galilee to Judea where St. John lives. He lives in a town called Ain Karim, if you have ever heard about the name. He lives in Ain Karim, next to Jerusalem. And sometimes the people there, the Palestinians would say, we call it Ain Karim, whatever, Karim, Ain Karim. So she lived there, Elizabeth lived there, and St. Mary went and lived with her. Who would know that the angel visited St. Mary in her house in Nazareth? Who would know that? God. And why would St. Luke know about it? Yeah, who would tell him? Yes, Kevin. St. Mary. She would tell him. So he spent a lot of time with St. Mary. That's lovely, actually. You know, St. Luke had gotten all this story in chapter 1 when he spoke about the birth of St. John the Baptist, the birth of Christ, St. Mary visiting Elizabeth, all that stuff. Who would tell him about? Who is the eyewitness? It would be St. Mary, right? Then St. Luke was around when Jesus picked his apostles. Now Jesus picked 12 apostles, and then another, how many? The second batch of apostles, yes? 70. He was one of those 70 when Jesus picked them in chapter 10. And we read that today. We read that from his own gospel. And he was around when Jesus was crucified. He was around when Jesus rose from the dead. He went and witnessed the ascension of Christ when he ascended to heaven. Then he's actually followed St. Paul. He followed St. Paul for a long time. Actually, St. Paul says he was the only one left with him. And St. Paul was about to go to be beheaded, to be martyred. It was a sad letter, if you want to read it. It is the second letter he wrote to his disciple Timothy. He told him, everybody left. I'm alone now. And he's a prisoner. I'm alone now. The only person is with me is Luke. God, of course, is always with him. The only person that stayed with me is Luke. So Luke stayed with St. Paul until his head was cut. But then we heard today that he stayed after that too. And most probably what Luke wrote in the Gospel and the book of Acts is everything that St. Paul taught and preached. Then he came the time for him to be martyred, and he was a Roman citizen, yes?
Did you say that Paul was the person or somebody else?
Say it again.
Was Paul the person or somebody else?
He followed St. Paul. See? I don't understand what you're saying. It's second? Paul was in prison. Yes, he was imprisoned. Because he wanted to teach about Jesus, and nobody wanted him to teach about Jesus. So at those times, whenever he spoke about Jesus, people hated it, especially the Jews. They didn't want it at all. And then the Romans started to be angry, and they wanted to persecute Christians. So that's why. That's why in your schools, that's what I want to tell you, in your schools, when you go to school and you tell them that you are a Christian, some people would not like it. None will pressure you too hard to be something different. They will pressure you too hard to say something bad, to change, to become what you're not. You are a Christian, but the friends sometimes, and the schoolmates, and maybe sometimes even the teachers, they will not like it. They want you to be like them. And then when they want you to be like them, they will pressure you so hard. You make fun of what you're doing. That's what they used to do with the apostles. Used to do that with the apostles, and the apostles suffered a lot. And St. Paul was killed, and St. Luke was killed because of that. So that is what the story of St. Luke is about, and then it's a beautiful story. St. Luke is the patron saint of the physician and the artists, especially the painters, the one who draw pictures, and the photographers. And he is the patron saint. Yes?
And we can also say about God.
Okay, good. You can talk about God in his school. That's good. All right. So we take his intercession and ask his prayers, and we be like him. So remember, St. Luke was good in what he did in studying. He knew how to read and write very eloquently. He knew how to he had a hobby. He knew how to paint and draw pictures. And St. Luke was a great follower of Christ, and he became a martyr, a witness for Christ. And we should be walking in his footsteps. You need to be good in your school. You need to be good in a hobby where you know how to do things that would be useful later. And you want to be a witness for Christ. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to talk about him, and don't be afraid to be like him, even if the whole world says, no, you're not good. And be strong and courageous, because this is what makes our church. That's what makes our church. Our church is made by courage, not by cowardice, not by weak character, and made of clever people who knew how to do best in their schooling and their best in their work, and to be honest. Glory be to the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.